The blood on Yates Keller's hands had long since dried into the cracks of his palms, mixing with dirt and wood splinters, until he could barely tell where the wounds ended and the calluses began. He gripped the fence post harder, driving it into the unforgiving California earth with a force born of desperation rather than strength. Because if he stopped working even for a moment, he would have to face the fact that he was utterly, completely alone. The year was 1878, and Riverside, California, was barely more than a collection of ambitious dreams scattered across the arid landscape. Yates had come west with his father and younger brother 3 years prior, drawn by promises of land and opportunity in the newly established citrus colony. They had claimed 200 acres of scrubland that everyone swore would grow anything if you just brought enough water to it. His father had believed it with the fervor of a convert. His brother had believed in their father. Yates had simply worked, because that was what you did when you loved people. Then the fever had come through the previous winter, swift and merciless as a flash flood. His father went first, then his brother 2 weeks later. Yates had dug both graves himself in the small plot behind the half-finished house, his hands blistering and bleeding as he carved their resting places from the hard earth. The preacher who had ridden out from the main settlement had been kind enough, but his words had meant nothing compared to the silence that followed. Now it was late September, and Yates was racing against time itself. The irrigation channels needed to be dug before the citrus trees arrived in November. The fences needed to be finished to keep out the cattle that wandered through from the ranches to the east. The house needed a proper roof before the winter rains came. Every task required 2 men at minimum, and Yates was trying to do it all alone because the alternative was admitting defeat and letting his father's dream die along with him. He was 26 years old and felt ancient. The sun was merciless overhead, even this late in the year. Sweat poured down his back, soaking through his shirt until it clung to his skin. His vision swam slightly at the edges, but he forced himself to lift the next post, to position it, to swing the hammer again. The impact jarred up his arms, and he felt something tear across his right palm. He glanced down to see fresh blood welling up from a split in the callus. He did not stop working. "Mister, if you do not put that hammer down right now, you are going to pass out and crack your skull open on one of those posts." The voice came from behind him, female and firm, with an undercurrent of genuine concern that made it impossible to ignore. Yates turned, squinting against the sun, and saw a woman standing about 20 feet away. She was leading a mule laden with supplies, and she looked at him with an expression that managed to convey both sympathy and exasperation in equal measure. She was young, probably close to his own age, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was simple calico, faded from washing and sun exposure, but clean and well-mended. What struck him most, though, were her eyes. They were a clear, determined gray, and they assessed him with the kind of no-nonsense evaluation that suggested she had seen plenty of stubborn men in her time and was not particularly impressed by another one. "I am fine," Yates said, which was such an obvious lie that he almost winced saying it. "You are bleeding all over that fence post, and I can see you swaying from here." She tied the mule to a scraggly bush and walked closer, pulling a small tin from the pocket of her apron. "My name is Katherine Oakes. My brother and I have the property about 2 miles north of here. I was riding past and saw you working, and I thought to myself, that man is going to kill himself if someone does not intervene. I have work to do." Yates turned back to the fence, but his hands were shaking now that he had stopped. He tried to grip the hammer, and his right palm simply would not close properly. Fresh blood ran down his wrist. "Not with those hands, you do not." Katherine was suddenly right beside him, and before he could protest, she had taken his wrist in her hands. Her touch was gentle but absolutely unyielding. She turned his hand over, examining the damage with a practiced eye. "Good Lord, how long have you been working without gloves? Lost them somewhere?" It might have been true. He honestly could not remember the last time he had worn them. "And you just kept going." She shook her head, but there was no judgment in it, only that same firm concern. "Come over to the shade. You need water, and these need to be cleaned before infection sets in." Yates wanted to argue. He wanted to pull his hand away and get back to work because every minute of daylight mattered. But Katherine had already started walking toward the meager shade offered by the partially completed house, and she still had hold of his wrist. Somehow, it seemed easier to follow than to fight. She settled him on an overturned crate and went back for her mule. She returned with a canteen, some clean cloth, and the tin she had shown him earlier. She handed him the canteen first. "Drink. All of it." He was thirsty enough that he obeyed without thinking. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the best thing he had experienced in days. He drank until the canteen was empty, and only then realized how parched he had been. Katherine wet one of the cloths from a second canteen and began cleaning his hands with efficient, gentle movements. It stung like hell, but Yates gritted his teeth and said nothing. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes that suggested she spent as much time in the sun as he did, and the strength in her hands that came from hard work. This was not some delicate town lady. This was someone who understood the kind of life he was living. "You are the one who lost his family last winter," she said quietly as she worked. It was not quite a question. "Yes, I am sorry. That was a terrible thing." "Yes." He did not trust himself to say more. She opened the tin, and the scent of herbs and beeswax rose up. "This is a salve my mother taught me to make. It will help these heal faster and keep infection out." She began applying it to his palms with careful attention to every cut and tear. The coolness of it was immediately soothing, easing the burning pain to something more manageable. "Why are you doing this?" Yates asked. Katherine looked up at him, those gray eyes meeting his directly. "Because everyone needs help sometimes, and it is wrong to watch someone suffer when you can do something about it." She returned her attention to his hands. "Also, because I know what it is like to try to hold something together when it feels like the whole world is working against you." There was a story there, but Yates did not press. Instead, he watched her work, noting the way she was thorough without being fussy, competent without being cold. When she finished with his hands, she wrapped them in clean cloth bandages. "These need to stay on for at least a day," she said. "2 would be better. That means no fence building, no hammer swinging, nothing that will tear them open again." "I cannot afford to stop," Yates said. "The trees are coming in November, and if I do not have the irrigation channels ready, they will die. If the trees die, I lose everything." "If you work yourself to death, you lose everything anyway." Katherine stood and brushed dust from her skirt. "Let me help you." Yates stared at her. "What?" "Let me help you. My brother can manage our place for a few days while I help you get caught up on the essential work. You need another pair of hands, and I have experience with this kind of labor. My father started our ranch from nothing, and we all worked to build it. I know how to dig channels, mend fences, and do whatever else needs doing. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering." She crossed her arms, and there was a set to her jaw that suggested arguing would be pointless. "I will come back tomorrow morning with proper supplies and work gloves. You are going to rest today. Eat something substantial and let those hands start healing. Tomorrow we will make a plan and start working through it properly." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Katherine was quiet for a moment, looking out at the acres of scrubland and the half-finished dreams scattered across it. Because when my father died 2 years ago, everyone said my brother and I should sell the ranch. They said we were too young, that we could not possibly manage it alone. They were wrong, but we only proved them wrong because people helped us when we needed it most. A few neighbors who came by to help with the branding, a ranch hand who stayed on even when we could not pay him full wages for a few months, a banker who gave us time to make things work. She looked back at him. You pass on the help you receive. That is how communities survive out here. Yates felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he had built without realizing it. I do not know what to say. Say yes, and then go inside and rest. Katherine untied her mule and swung up onto its back with practiced ease. I will be back at dawn. Try not to do anything foolish in the meantime. She rode off before he could respond, leaving Yates sitting on his crate with bandaged hands and a strange, unfamiliar feeling that he eventually recognized as hope. True to her word, Katherine returned the next morning just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. She brought work gloves, more medical supplies, food her brother had insisted she take, and a detailed list of questions about what needed to be done and in what order. They sat at the rough table Yates had built inside the house and went through everything systematically. The irrigation channels are the priority, Yates explained, pointing to the rough map he had sketched. The water comes from the canal the Colony Association built, but I need to get it distributed across the property. I have about half the main channel dug, but I need to finish it and then branch off secondaries. Katherine studied the map. That is a lot of digging for one person, even a healthy one. What about the fences? I have the posts set for the north boundary. I need to string wire and finish the east side completely. And the house? Yates glanced around at the bare walls and the canvas stretched across the ceiling joists in place of a proper roof. It can wait. I can live in this through winter if I have to. Not comfortably and not safely if the rains are bad. Katherine tapped the map. Here is what we are going to do. Today, we work on the irrigation channel together. We can get more done with 2 people, and it is the most time-sensitive task. Tomorrow, I will bring my brother to help. Between the 3 of us, we can finish the main channel and get started on the branches. That will put you ahead of schedule. Your brother should not have to. My brother Timothy owes me for the time I spent helping him build his new barn last month, Katherine interrupted with a slight smile. He will complain for exactly 5 minutes and then work without another word of protest. Trust me. Over the next several days, a routine developed. Katherine arrived every morning at dawn, often with Timothy in tow. The 3 of them would work through the day, breaking only for a quick lunch and water. Timothy was 19, all lanky height and enthusiasm, still growing into the man he would become. He treated Yates with easy friendliness, and Katherine with the exasperated affection of a younger sibling who knew he was outmatched. Yates found himself watching Katherine as they worked. She moved with economy of motion, never wasting energy on unnecessary movements. When they were digging the channels, she worked at a steady pace that ate through the distance without exhausting herself. When they strung fence wire, her hands were quick and sure, tying off the connections with practiced efficiency. She knew when to push through discomfort and when to stop and rest. She knew how to read the land, suggesting slight alterations to Yates's plans that would save time or improve water flow. More than that, she knew when he needed silence and when he needed conversation. Some hours they worked without speaking, the only sounds the bite of shovels into earth and the distant calls of birds. Other times, she would tell him stories about the ranch, about Timothy's misadventures learning to break horses, about the time they had lost half their herd in a canyon and spent 3 days bringing them back. Her stories were not meant to minimize his loss, but to remind him that struggle and perseverance were universal, that he was not as alone as he felt. His hands healed. The salve she brought worked wonders, and with the gloves she provided, he could work without tearing open the wounds again. Within a week, the raw, bleeding mess had transformed into healing skin, still tender but functional. The irrigation channels grew. The main line was completed, then the first set of branches. Timothy helped Yates finish the eastern fence line, and Katherine insisted they all spend one full day properly roofing the house before the weather could turn. "You are not spending winter under canvas," she said firmly when Yates tried to argue it could wait. "That is final." So they roofed the house, and Yates had to admit it felt significantly more solid with proper shingles overhead. It was starting to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. It was during the second week that things shifted between Yates and Katherine in a way that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with something unspoken that had been growing between them. They were working on one of the more distant sections of the property, just the two of them since Timothy had needed to stay at the ranch for a cattle delivery. The day was warm, and they had been digging steadily for hours. Katherine straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back, and Yates called for a break. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree that marked the future corner of the property, passing the water canteen back and forth. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the rustle of leaves overhead and the distant sound of a hawk. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said eventually. "Of course. Why do you stay? Not just here in Riverside, but on this specific land. You could sell it, go somewhere easier. Start fresh without all these memories." Yates was quiet for a long time, considering. "I thought about it," he admitted. "Right after I buried them, I thought maybe I should just leave. Go north to San Francisco or back east, anywhere but here." He picked up a twig and turned it over in his fingers. "But then I thought about my father. He believed so strongly that this could be something. He spent the last 3 years of his life working toward this vision of orange groves and prosperity. My brother believed in him, in the dream. And I realized that if I left, it would be like saying their belief was worthless, like their work and their hope did not matter. So you are staying for them." "I am staying because of them," Yates corrected. "There is a difference. I am not trying to preserve some shrine to their memory. I am trying to prove that their faith in this place was not misplaced, that something good can grow here." He looked at Katherine. "Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense." Her expression was thoughtful. "When my father died, everyone expected us to crumble, to give up and admit we could not do it. There were even men who came around offering to buy the ranch, always mentioning how hard it must be for a young woman and her brother to manage such a big operation. As if my father had not spent years teaching us every aspect of running it. As if we had not been working alongside him since we were children. But you stayed. We stayed. And we made it work, not just to honor my father, but because that ranch is ours. We built it with our own hands and our own sweat. No one gets to take that from us just because they think we are too young or too inexperienced." She smiled slightly. "I suppose we are both stubborn. I suppose we are." Yates found himself smiling back and realized it was the first time he had genuinely smiled in months. Katherine held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond shared stubbornness or mutual respect. Then she stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "We should get back to work. This channel will not dig itself." But the moment lingered between them as they returned to their shovels. By the third week, the transformation of the property was remarkable. The main irrigation system was complete and functional. The fences were finished. The house had a roof, a proper door, and even shutters on the windows. The land was ready for the arrival of the citrus trees. Timothy stopped coming as regularly, needed back at the ranch for their own work, but Katherine continued to arrive each morning. The nature of the work shifted from urgent construction to preparation and planning. They walked the property together, marking where the rows of trees would go, planning the layout for maximum efficiency. They repaired tools, organized the shed, and made lists of supplies needed. Yates knew he should tell her that he could manage on his own now, that she had already done far more than anyone could reasonably expect. But every morning when he saw her riding up on her mule, he felt something lift in his chest, and he could not quite bring himself to say the words that would end her visits. He was fairly certain she knew she did not need to keep coming. She was not the kind of person who failed to notice when a task was complete, which meant she was choosing to come for other reasons, and that thought made his heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. It was late October when everything came to a head, literally. They were in the shed, organizing the last of the tools, when Yates straightened up too quickly and cracked his head soundly on a low beam. He sat down hard, seeing stars, and Katherine was beside him immediately. "Let me see," she said, her hands gentle as she examined his scalp. "You are going to have a magnificent bump, but the skin is not broken." "I am fine," Yates said, though his head was ringing. "You are always fine," Katherine said with exasperation. "Even when you are bleeding or concussed or working yourself into exhaustion, you are always fine. Do you ever admit when you are hurt?" "I am admitting it now," Yates said. He looked up at her face close to his, her expression caught between concern and frustration and something else, something that made his breath catch. "Katherine, you what?" she prompted when he faltered. "I do not want you to stop coming here." The words came out in a rush. "I know the essential work is done. I know you have your own responsibilities at your ranch, but I look forward to seeing you every morning, and I do not want that to end. I do not know if that is fair to say, and I do not know what it means exactly, but it is true." Katherine was very still. "Do you want to know why I kept coming even after the urgent work was finished?" "Yes." "Because somewhere around the second day, I stopped thinking of this as a neighborly obligation and started thinking of it as an excuse to spend time with you." She said it simply, directly, the same way she approached everything in her life. "I like you, Yates Keller. I like your determination and your stubbornness, and the fact that you are trying so hard to honor the people you lost. I like working beside you. I like talking with you. I like you." Yates reached up and took her hand, the one that had first cleaned and bandaged his wounds, the one that had worked beside his for weeks now. "I like you too, more than like you if I am being honest." "Then be honest," Katherine said softly. "I am falling in love with you," Yates said, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, and certainly not now, not in the middle of all this. But you showed up when I needed help most, and you stayed, and somewhere along the way you became the best part of my day, the best part of my life." Katherine's smile was radiant. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been for a while now." Yates stood, mindful of the low beam this time, and cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" "I would be disappointed if you did not," Katherine said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. She tasted of sunshine and possibility, and kissing her felt like coming home to a place he had not known he was seeking. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Katherine rested her forehead against his. "So, what do we do now?" "I suppose we do what we have been doing," Yates said. "We work, we plan, we build something together. Only now we are honest about what we are building." "A life together," Katherine said, testing the words. if you want that, if it is not too fast or too presumptuous. Yates, I spent 3 weeks working beside you from dawn until dusk. I have seen you exhausted and frustrated and hurting. I have seen how you treat the land and how you honor the memory of your family. I have seen who you are when you think no one is watching. She kissed him again, brief and sweet. It is not too fast. It is exactly the right pace for people like us. The citrus trees arrived in mid-November, small saplings carefully packed in damp burlap. Yates, Katherine, and Timothy spent 4 days planting them in the prepared rows, spacing them precisely, ensuring each one had access to the irrigation channels. It was back-breaking work, but there was joy in it too, the sense of bringing the land to life. These will not produce fruit for a few years, Yates told Katherine as they planted the last row. It is going to be a long time before this place is truly profitable. Good things take time, Katherine said, and you will not be alone while you wait. I will be here. Are you sure? It is a lot to take on, tying yourself to someone who is essentially starting from nothing. Katherine laughed. Yates, we have been courting for a month through manual labor and irrigation planning. If I was going to be scared off by hard work and uncertainty, I would have left already. She planted the last sapling with firm, decisive movements. Besides, Timothy and I have the ranch running smoothly now. We can hire seasonal help when we need it. That means I have time to invest in other ventures. Other ventures. You, this place, our future. She stood and brushed dirt from her hands. Ask me properly, Yates, his heart hammered in his chest. We have only been courting a month. And we have been working side by side for twice that long. I know who you are. I know what I want. Do you? Yates looked at her, at this remarkable woman who had appeared when he needed help most, and had stayed to become something far more important than a helping hand. He dropped to one knee, right there in the dirt between the rows of newly planted citrus trees. Katherine Oakes, would you marry me? Would you take a chance on this half-finished dream, and a man who is still figuring out how to build a life from broken pieces? Yes, Katherine said immediately. Yes to all of it. The dream, the man, the life we will build together. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, long and thorough, while Timothy diplomatically wandered off to check the irrigation channels. They were married in early December in the small church in Riverside's main settlement. Timothy stood up for both of them, since Katherine had no other family and Yates's friends were few. The ceremony was simple. The guests, a modest collection of neighbors and fellow colonists, but it felt perfect. Katherine wore her best dress, and Yates wore the suit he had brought from Missouri and had not touched since his father's funeral. This time, wearing it felt like a beginning rather than an ending. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the house Yates had built, the one Katherine had insisted be properly roofed. Yates had worked to make it as comfortable as possible, bringing in a real bed frame and mattress, hanging curtains Katherine had sewn, building furniture in the evenings after the day's work was done. It is not much yet, Yates said as he carried Katherine over the threshold, but it is ours. It is perfect, Katherine said firmly. It is home. That first winter was an adjustment. Katherine officially moved her belongings from the ranch, though she and Yates rode over regularly to help Timothy with the heavier work. The three of them fell into a new rhythm, supporting each other as an extended family. Timothy teased them mercilessly about being newlyweds, but was clearly happy for his sister. The citrus trees survived the winter. Yates and Katherine tended them carefully, adjusting the irrigation, protecting the younger saplings during the occasional cold snap. They also worked on improving the house, adding a proper kitchen, building storage, creating a home rather than just a shelter. In the evenings, they would sit together, Yates often working on some piece of leather that needed mending or tool that needed sharpening. Katherine sewing or mending or planning the next season's work. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building the foundation of intimacy that would sustain them through all the years to come. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked one evening. "Marrying me so quickly, taking on all of this?" Katherine looked up from the shirt she was mending and smiled. "Not for a single moment. Do you regret asking me? Never. I just want to make sure you are happy." "Yates, I am working land I helped prepare, building a life with a man I love and respect. I am exactly where I want to be." She set down her mending and moved to sit beside him. "You need to stop waiting for disaster to strike. We have had our share of hard times. Now we are allowed to enjoy the good ones." He kissed her temple. "You are right. As usual. Remember that," Katherine said with a laugh. "It will save us arguments later." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that tested the irrigation system and their resolve. There were frosts that damaged trees and required replanting. There were financial tight spots when income did not quite match expenses, and they had to be creative about making ends meet. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. The citrus trees began producing fruit in their third year. The first harvest was modest, but the quality was good, and the Riverside colony's connection to the markets in Los Angeles meant they could sell everything they grew. With each passing year, the harvest increased, and the financial situation stabilized. Timothy met a young woman named Sarah at a barn raising in 1881, and after a whirlwind courtship that reminded Yates and Katherine very much of their own, he married her that summer. Sarah was practical and hardworking, a perfect match for Timothy's enthusiastic energy. She also became one of Katherine's closest friends, and the two families remained tightly knit. It was in the spring of 1882 that Katherine told Yates she was pregnant. They were walking through the orange groves, which were now substantial enough to provide real shade, the trees heavy with fragrant blossoms. "Are you happy?" Katherine asked after she delivered the news. "I know we have not talked much about children." Yates pulled her into his arms. "I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy?" "Very happy. Also terrified. I have no idea how to be a mother." "We will figure it out together," Yates said, "just like we figured out everything else." Their son was born in December of 1882, perfectly healthy and blessed with excellent lungs that he demonstrated frequently. They named him James, after Yates's father, and from the moment Yates held his son, he felt a sense of completion he had not known was missing. This was what his father had worked for, what his brother had hoped to see. The next generation growing up on land they had claimed and tamed. Katherine recovered quickly from the birth, though she complained that James had inherited his father's stubbornness about sleep schedules. She returned to work as soon as she felt able, often with James in a sling against her chest, supervising while Yates and hired hands managed the heavier tasks. The ranch continued to grow. They added more acreage, planted more trees. They built a larger house as their needs expanded, turning the original structure into a storage building and workshop. The new house had multiple bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset over their land. A daughter, Grace, arrived in 1885, quieter than her brother but equally determined. She had Katherine's gray eyes and Yates's dark hair, and she was absolutely fearless. By the time she could walk, she was following Yates everywhere, wanting to help with every task. Another son, Henry, came in 1888. He was the thoughtful one, always watching, always considering before acting. Where James was impulsive and Grace was bold, Henry was deliberate, and the three children balanced each other perfectly. Timothy and Sarah had children of their own, 4 in total, and the combined families created a tight-knit community of their own. The children grew up together, running between the ranch and the citrus farm, learning to ride and work and appreciate the land their parents had built their lives around. Riverside itself grew and prospered. The gamble on citrus proved wise, and the area became known for its orange groves. The colony expanded into a proper town with schools, churches, businesses. The railroad came through, making it easier to ship fruit and bring in supplies. The wild, uncertain frontier that Yates had first encountered gradually transformed into an established agricultural community. But even as things changed around them, Yates and Katherine's partnership remained constant. They still worked side by side, still made decisions together, still found joy in the daily rhythms of their life. The intimacy that had grown from those first weeks of shared labor never faded. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, knew when to push and when to yield, knew how to support each other through difficulties, and celebrate successes together. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Katherine back to the spot where they had planted that first row of citrus trees, the ones that had arrived just before they got engaged. The trees were mature now, heavy with fruit, their branches spreading wide. "You remember planting these?" Yates asked, his arm around Katherine's waist. "I remember you asking if I was sure about tying myself to someone starting from nothing," Katherine said with a smile. "I remember thinking you were an idiot for even questioning it." "I was terrified," Yates admitted. "Terrified that I could not give you the life you deserved, that this place would fail and I would drag you down with it. And instead, we built something remarkable." Katherine gestured at the groves, the house visible in the distance, the irrigation channels that fed everything. "We did this, Yates, together. I could not have done any of it without you. I would have worked myself to death that first year if you had not intervened. Lucky for both of us that I am nosy and could not ride past a man bleeding all over his fence posts." Katherine turned in his arms to face him fully. "I meant what I said that first day. Everyone needs help sometimes. You just needed to let yourself accept it." "Best decision I ever made," Yates said, kissing her softly. "Accepting your help, falling in love with you, building this life together. All of it." They stood there together in the shade of the trees they had planted, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their shared work and shared love, and Yates felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. He thought about his father and brother, about the dreams they had held for this land. He hoped they could somehow see what it had become, hoped they knew their faith had not been misplaced. The children grew older. James showed an aptitude for the business side of the farm, keeping careful records and negotiating sales. Grace loved the physical work, often joining Yates in the groves, learning to prune and graft and care for the trees. Henry turned out to have a gift for mechanics, and as new equipment became available, he was always the first to understand how it worked and how to keep it running. In 1893, Yates hired his first full-time worker beyond seasonal help, a young man fresh from the East Coast who reminded Yates painfully of himself at that age, full of hope and determination, and no idea what he was getting into. Teaching someone else the work he had learned through trial and error felt like coming full circle somehow. Katherine expanded their household production, keeping bees and chickens, maintaining a large garden. She also started helping other women in the area, particularly new arrivals who were struggling to adapt to the demands of agricultural life. She taught them the practical skills her mother had taught her, shared remedies and recipes, and created a network of support similar to what she had provided Yates all those years ago. You cannot help yourself, Yates teased her one evening after she returned from spending the afternoon teaching a neighbor's wife how to make preserves. You see someone struggling, and you have to fix it. Says the man who spent 3 hours yesterday helping the Hendersons repair their irrigation pump, Katherine shot back. We are a matched pair, you and I. Neither of us can stand by and watch people suffer when we could help. True enough, Yates admitted. I suppose we come by it honestly, though. You helped me when I needed it most. It changed my life. How could I not do the same for others when I have the chance? As the century drew to a close, Yates sometimes sat on his porch in the evenings and marveled at the path his life had taken. The scared, desperate man bleeding into the California dirt seemed like someone from another lifetime. That man had been alone, convinced he had to carry every burden by himself, unable to see any future beyond the next immediate task. The man Yates had become was surrounded by family and community. He had a wife he loved more with each passing year, children who were growing into remarkable people, land that produced abundantly, and a sense of belonging that went bone deep. He had learned that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom, that building something meaningful required partnership and trust, and that love could grow even in the hardest soil if you tended it properly. The physical scars on his hands from that terrible first year had long since faded, replaced by the ordinary marks of a working man. Calluses in familiar places, the occasional new cut or scrape, a finger that bent slightly wrong from an old break that had not set quite right. But those hands had held his wife, his children, his grandchildren when they eventually arrived. They had planted thousands of trees, built a home, and worked land that now sustained not just his family but several hired workers and their families as well. One evening in 1899, Timothy and Sarah came over for dinner, bringing their youngest daughter who was sweet on James despite being 2 years older than him. The adults sat on the porch after the meal while the younger people walked through the groves, and the conversation turned to memory. "Do you remember that first day Katherine rode over here?" Timothy asked Yates. "I thought she was crazy when she came home and said she was going to help you get the place ready for planting. You said I was wasting my time on a doomed venture," Katherine reminded him. "I was 19 and thought I knew everything," Timothy said with a laugh. "Clearly, I knew nothing. This place has been a roaring success." "It almost was a doomed venture," Yates said quietly. "Another few weeks of working alone, and I would have either killed myself through exhaustion or had to admit defeat and sell. Katherine showing up when she did saved everything." "It was not just me," Katherine protested. "You had the determination and the vision. I just provided an extra pair of hands." "You provided much more than that," Yates said, taking her hand. "You provided hope when I had none left. You showed me it was possible to let someone help, to build something together rather than struggling alone. You taught me that accepting help was not admitting weakness but recognizing strength in partnership." "Well, when you put it that way, I suppose I did contribute something beyond manual labor," Katherine said with a smile. "Though honestly, I got as much out of it as you did. Working alongside you, seeing your dedication, falling in love with you while we dug irrigation channels and argued about fence placement. It was not exactly a conventional courtship, but it suited us perfectly." "Still the strangest love story I have ever heard," Sarah said. "Medical intervention leading to marriage. The best things in life rarely follow conventional paths," Katherine said. "At least, that has been my experience." The new century arrived with great fanfare. Riverside hosted celebrations, and there was much talk about the modern age and all the changes it would bring. Yates, now in his 40s, felt the weight of time in a way he had not when he was younger. He looked at his children, nearly grown now, and thought about what he wanted to leave them beyond land and trees. One night, he sat down and wrote out the story of those early days. He wrote about his father and brother, about their dreams and their deaths. He wrote about the desperate struggle of trying to hold everything together alone. He wrote about the day Katherine appeared, the moment she took his bleeding hands and said she would help. He wrote about love growing through shared work, about building a life from broken pieces, about the importance of accepting help and offering it freely to others. He gave the pages to Katherine when he finished, suddenly uncertain. I wanted the children to know the whole story. Not just the successful part, but the struggle that came before. I wanted them to understand how we got here. Katherine read through the pages carefully, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. "This is beautiful, Yates, and important. They should know. Everyone should know that success is not about being strong enough to do everything alone. It is about being wise enough to accept help when you need it and brave enough to offer it when you can." They shared the story with their children that evening, all three of them gathered in the parlor. Yates read parts aloud, and Katherine filled in details he had glossed over or forgotten. The children listened intently, James and Grace asking questions, Henry absorbing everything in his quiet, thoughtful way. "I never realized how close we came to losing all of this," James said when they finished. "I knew grandfather and uncle died, but I did not understand how bad things were for you, Father." "I did not want you to carry that burden," Yates said. "But as you get older, I think it is important to understand that what we have now was not inevitable. It required work and luck and help from people who cared. Never take it for granted, and never be too proud to ask for help when you need it. Also, never be too busy to offer help when someone else needs it," Katherine added. "That is equally important. We are all connected. What strengthens one of us strengthens all of us." The lessons took root. As James, Grace, and Henry grew into adulthood and took over more of the operation of the farm, they carried forward the principles their parents had lived. They hired fairly, treated workers well, and helped neighbors in need. They understood that their prosperity was built not just on their own efforts, but on a foundation of community and mutual support. James married in 1903, bringing home a wife named Margaret who was as practical and hardworking as his mother. Grace shocked everyone by falling in love with a teacher who had come west from Boston, a gentle man named William who knew nothing about farming but was eager to learn. Henry married his childhood sweetheart, Timothy, and Sarah's second daughter Clara, keeping the families even more tightly intertwined. The grandchildren started arriving, and Yates and Katherine entered yet another phase of life. They gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the farm, trusting their children to manage things while they took on more advisory roles. It was strange at first, letting go of work that had defined them for so long, but there was freedom in it too. They traveled a little, visiting San Francisco and Los Angeles, seeing how much the region had changed since they first arrived. They spent time with Timothy and Sarah, watching their nieces and nephews grow. They worked in the garden, maintained the house, and enjoyed the luxury of time that was not dictated by urgent necessity. In 1910, on a mild spring afternoon, Yates and Katherine walked through the orange groves together, something they still did regularly. The trees were mature now, their trunks thick, their branches heavy with fruit and blossoms. The scent was intoxicating, and bees hummed industriously among the flowers. 32 years, Katherine said, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "Since the day I rode over and found you bleeding all over your fence posts. Best day of my life," Yates said. "Even though I did not know it at the time. You thought I was a busybody interfering in your business," Katherine said with a laugh. "I thought you were a miracle," Yates corrected. I was just too stubborn and proud to admit I needed one. They had reached the oldest section of the groves, the trees they had planted together in those first weeks of their acquaintance. These trees had seen everything: the early struggles, the gradual success, the expansion of the farm, the growth of the family. They stood as living monuments to perseverance and partnership. I would not change anything, Katherine said quietly. Not a single moment, not even the hard parts. It all led us here. Neither would I, Yates agreed. Well, maybe I would have worn gloves more consistently, could have saved us both some trouble. Katherine laughed and swatted his arm playfully. You would not be you if you had not tried to do everything yourself first. That stubbornness is part of why I fell in love with you. I thought it was my devastating charm and good looks. Those too, Katherine said, standing on her toes to kiss him. Even after 30 years of marriage, kissing her still made his heart race. But mostly the stubbornness. They stood there together, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, supervised by one of their daughters-in-law. The sound of laughter and life filled the air, mixing with the scent of orange blossoms and the warmth of the California sun. Yates thought about the man he had been, alone and desperate, convinced he had to carry every burden by himself. He thought about Katherine appearing like an answer to a prayer he had not known to pray, offering help when he was too proud to ask for it. He thought about the life they had built together, not despite the hard beginning but somehow because of it. The struggle had taught them both what mattered, had stripped away everything superficial and left only the essential truth. That love and partnership and shared purpose could transform even the most difficult circumstances into something beautiful. Thank you, he said to Katherine, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. For what? She asked, though he knew she knew. For seeing someone who needed help and deciding to do something about it, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me. Thank you for letting me, Katherine replied, for being brave enough to accept help, even when it went against every instinct you had, for being the kind of man worth falling in love with. They walked slowly back toward the house, hand in hand as they had been for 30 years and would be for all the years to come. The land around them thrived, the family they had created continued to grow, and the love that had begun with a simple offer of help and healing salve had proven to be the strongest crop they ever planted. It had weathered every drought, survived every frost, and only grown deeper and stronger with time. They had started with raw hands and broken dreams, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy not just of land and trees, but of love, partnership, and the simple but profound act of helping one another through the hardest times. As the sun set over the orange groves, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Yates and Katherine sat on their porch, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved completely. The desperate loneliness of those early days was nothing but a distant memory, transformed by time and care into the foundation of something remarkable. They had proven that no struggle was too great when faced together, that accepting help was a form of strength rather than weakness, and that love could indeed grow anywhere if you tended it with patience and care. Their story would be told and retold through generations, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a neighbor with salve for your wounds and the willingness to say, "Let me help you."